What's Left America. I'm Chris Tritico.
Hi, I'm Andy Georgeson.
James Campbell.
And I'm Chris Bell.
What's Left America is produced by Left Out Media and brought to you by the generosity of our sponsors and friends like Poppy Massey and hopefully someday friends just like you. This is our Father's Day edition, so we kicked Andy out of the studio and had her call in today. So just be the guys, right, guys?
That's exactly right.
Hello.
And I want to say happy Father's Day to the two of you. And I know you both are really good dads. And I'd say happy Father's Day to all other dads in the country as
You
well.
have absolutely nothing to base that on.
Thank you.
Well, that would be true.
But thank you anyway.
I will accept your compliment with grace. Today on the show, we're going to cover the North Korean summit, or the Big Nothing. The party of Trump, Sanford and Corker call him out and get forced out. The Clinton email scandal bust and God's will, children and parents separated by the king. And then we'll finish the show, as always, with Out of Left Field. Be sure to like us on Facebook and be sure to rate us on iTunes. Let's get started right now with the big show. First up, we're going to talk about the North Korean summit. The North Korean summit, or the Big Nothing. It was, this was put together in a couple of days. The president said, I don't have to get ready for this thing, and apparently didn't. And actually, that's not true. I understand it from his schedule and people in the know that he spent several hours every day getting ready for this thing, even though he acted like he didn't. But I want to talk about a couple of things first, and there's several things I want to talk about on this thing, but a couple of things first. They ended this. They go into this thing with the president talking in great detail about how much he loves Kim Jong-un, patting a guy on the back, saluting a general from the North Korean military, everything you would expect a president of the United States not to do. Is that what we expected?
No.
So, go ahead, Chris.
No, you go.
The way I saw this is I juxtaposition this against the Obama administration and how people, the Republicans, would lose their minds when, just at the suggestion of Obama meeting with someone of considered an international pariah like Kim. And so what you had, Trump did prepare. He obviously looked at that marketing video that they created to show Kim at that summit. But this was about theatrical optics. You got nothing of substance from this thing. But what you did get was kind of long game where people were going to be looking at the details that come afterwards. And that means that the Trump administration, especially the Secretary of State, really have to work to put together what this is going to mean. It means getting something of substance on paper and getting Kim to agree to denuclearize.
But they say it means all of those things that it doesn't say. And when we get further down the line, the North Koreans can easily push back and say, no, that's not what it says. It doesn't say any of that. And I think it was a huge win for Kim. I think he came out smelling like a rose and got exactly what he was looking for in terms of finally having some credibility with the rest of the world. But my takeaway on it was kind of like what I heard years ago when a guy who was not from the United States had spent some time in Texas and was asking a friend of mine to explain fixin'. He kept hearing these people talk about that they were fixing to do something. And finally, my friend just said, well, that really means you haven't done shit yet, but you're fixing to do a whole lot when we get around to it.
Andy, jump in here. You're down in Florida visiting your dad. And so
I agree with Chris. Kim was the big winner here. But for Trump, it was a huge win, meaning not Trump as the president of the United States representing the United States, but for him personally. And of course, that is what Trump likes. He likes a win for him personally, and he doesn't really care about the details. In fact, I think that this is going to be like the Obamacare situation, where he campaigned on getting rid of the Affordable Care Act and then kicked it to Congress. And when Congress couldn't do it, he said, they failed. The same thing with this. He went, he had his show. Now he's kicking it to the Secretary of State, to State Department. Let them work it out. Kicking it to Congress. Hopefully they'll work something out. He's sitting in his office with a pen, ready to sign something. And if they can't get it together, he wins, they lose.
It'll be the Democrats' fault.
Okay, let me explain my point clearer. So I also agree with Chris. Yes, there was no specific policy, no strategy on peacemaking or economic development. Nothing of substance came out of this meeting except a framework to move forward. And that's the point that I'm trying to make. Now, that's the good news.
James, what's the framework?
I also said that the devil will be in the details. We have nothing on paper but a handshake, and yes, we're getting ready to do something. But already, Trump is talking about ending military exercises in South Korea. Even Republican hawks say that's a mistake.
Well, he's not talking about it. He did it. He agreed to it. And that's the point I wanted to make next, is President Trump signed that statement at the end agreeing to end the joint military exercises with South Korea without discussing it with South Korea or Japan, who rely on us to protect them in South Korea.
Right.
We got nothing in return.
There's a reason we have those bases in the Pacific. And for Trump to unilaterally say, we are not going to do this, first of all, it's a big waste of money. Secondly, you need to train for these emergencies. That's why they do them. These things have a purpose. He gave away the store. As far as a framework is concerned, I don't see a framework. A framework happened under the Clinton administration dealing with North Korea, where they said, these are the general principles that we want to, and there was even a word, it was called the framework of something, I can't recall it right now, and it turned out to be a big fiasco because North Korea interpreted that to mean interpreted that to mean whatever North Korea wanted.
And does anybody, with
Iran, and they dotted every I and they crossed every T, and they made sure that every single word had a clear definition. And so,
Andy, they dotted every I and crossed every T. Here, there just weren't very many I's or very many T's. That was the only thing. That was the only thing that was missing. And based on our discussion last week, I don't think anybody really believes that North Korea is seriously going to move toward total denuclearization, especially when what came out of this Singapore summit doesn't really say that at all.
It doesn't mention it.
Okay, so I agree with all of that. But one thing that came out of this is that Kim is tamping down the whole nuclear arms race thing. On the Iran deal,
but wait a minute,
you still don't have the international agency able to go in there and do inspections in Iran, and I don't think you're going to get.
You don't have that in North Korea, James.
No, I'm not arguing that, but you cited the Iran deal as a great deal. Yes, in some respects, yes, but with North Korea. 2 months ago, people were thinking about them hitting Japan or the west coast of the U.S. That's been considerably tamped down. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not basically defending what Trump did. In fact, I said it was theatrics.
Well, some of it is defensible. I think Chris made that point last week that we need to change our position toward North Korea because it's become a very dangerous situation. And so him meeting with him, but don't come back and herald it as some huge advancement. I remember a friend of mine the day after said, well, this must have been what it felt like on VE Day after World War II.
I didn't say that. I said what we have is a framework to move forward. I didn't say we had a deal. We had a meeting and they agreed to do this and do that, but the devil is in the details.
But the problem is they haven't agreed to do this or that. They haven't agreed to do anything, and that's the issue that I have with it. And Chris is right. Last week I said, look, we're at a point for years that we needed to change strategies. But when you change strategies, you should in fact have a strategy, and I don't see one here.
and
so
there's no
that's the
strategy,
problem I
no
have.
policy, nothing but. We have agreed to tamp down the nuclear arms race, and we will put the details to this framework, whatever that may be. But the devil is in the details.
All right, let me
That's
ask
what
this,
I'm saying.
and hopefully we'll get some. But let me ask this question, and the administration's been making this point ever since the summit ended. For a year, you've been yelling at me about calling him Little Rocket Man and ramping up the rhetoric. So I go and meet with him, and I'm nice to him, and I get the framework for a deal. And now you're mad at me for being nice to him. Where's the middle ground, Democrats? Where can I go as the president and get something done that you will be happy with?
Well, when you look back historically, and obviously you need to if you're going to go into these types of situations, and you look at what transpired with Reagan and Gorbachev, I never got the feeling that they were big chums. They were adversaries that were trying to work out a deal.
And they never hugged.
It just didn't come across like it was
I had
a
Dennis
big
Rodman as a middleman.
Right.
It never came across like a big show, and it didn't, and a big love fest. And I think that's what is disturbing to a lot of people about this.
Trudico, I take your point. I don't have, and I think I said this last week, I don't have a problem with the President of the United States meeting with North Korea. Just like I thought it was great during the campaign when candidate Barack Obama said that he was willing to meet with the Iranians. I liked that Obama went to Cuba and met with Raul Castro. I thought that was great. Trump went to North Korea and gave the man everything he wanted. I have to push back on James a little bit. I don't think there's a framework. I think there were a bunch of announcements off the cuff about denuclearization and I don't even know what else. And Trump stopping these war games, which are necessary. And the devil can be in the details, but that's like the devil in the details is one of those things you say when there is nothing worked out. I mean, there's a lot of detail.
I didn't say anything was worked out.
I'm glad there was a meeting. It would have been nice if there had been more preparation and that we didn't give away the store. I have very low expectations for any long-term good to come out of this.
Well, then they were met.
If it does, that's great.
Yeah.
That all of your expectations were met. You should be happy.
But let me be clear. I am not agreeing that this was a major success.
So the final.
No, I get that. I don't mean to imply that.
I'm just glad Hawaii will be around when I visit next year.
Well, you better hurry because if the volcano keeps going, it won't be there.
James Rodman, the Worm Campbell.
One final
that would
point.
Be rebound slam donkey.
One final point on this, and this is just this interview cracked me up. Representative Chris Hayes. I sent it to you guys. I hope you watched it. Chris Hayes getting interviewed. I think it was on MSNBC, getting interviewed, and the reporter asked him some very specific questions about did Donald Trump go over there and kiss his ring, and did he do this, did he do that? And what Chris Hayes didn't realize, they were the exact statements that he made criticizing Barack Obama when he ran over and talked to and met with Raul Castro.
Yeah.
And so he set him up brilliantly, and then played the tape of Representative Hayes slamming Barack Obama with the exact same phrases. And then if you watched him trying to dig out of that hole, it was the funniest thing I've seen in I don't know how long.
Yeah.
I thought it was funny sad. It was funny sad because it was so clearly I mean, such an exact parallel. And it, if we could get to the point where we could just admit, hey, we didn't like it because Barack Obama did it, and we like it because Trump did it. At least,
Right.
it would just
Chris
take
Tritico.
But-
The problem is Chris Tritico just doesn't seem to understand that the slate was wiped completely clean when Donald Trump came into office. We don't talk about Barack Obama anymore.
Well, that's
Chris.
and then the problem is we can't even agree in this country who our friends and our enemies are anymore.
We don't know.
Oh.
We
that's
don't
a
know who
shame.
they are anymore.
Yeah.
That's the problem. All right, let's move on.
Well, I think it's going to start getting clearer.
me too.
Well, we used to know that.
If Donald Trump opens a condo in North Korea, we know exactly what the details were.
Hotel.
We know exactly what the details were. All right, let's move on now. It's time to move on to the next topic. The party of Trump. Sanford and Corker call him out, and they got forced out of the party. They're not the only ones. In anyone in the Republican Party who has the gall to say Donald Trump is wrong gets forced out of the party. Bob Corker spoke out, and he was literally going to lose his Senate seat, and so he had to retire. And he's been only one of the few Republicans with enough guts since he retired to speak out against the president. But it was only after he announced his retirement that he found his what am I trying to say here?
Oh, I think we know.
His voice,
but
his courage, his spine.
This is so frightening because if you look back where we were 2 years ago in 2016 at this very same time and what the Republicans were saying about this hostile takeover of their party and this man has to be stopped, maybe even at the convention, and this is just this can't be happening, and to now hear that in places like Texas, and it's probably not a whole lot different in South Carolina where Mark Sanford got defeated, that Trump has an 88% approval rating within the Republican
among
Party.
Republicans, because anyone in the middle of the Republican Party has been kicked out.
But it's extraordinary, 88%, which is higher than Ronald Reagan's approval rating.
Right.
With this, and here on the left, we see this egomaniac running roughshod over everything that the presidency has stood for our entire lifetimes, and they're embracing it, which leads me to believe what I've thought for a long time is that the Republican Party really, when you get right down to it, only cares about one thing and one thing only, and that's winning. And if their guy has won and he calls himself a Republican, that's good enough for them, and they have to go embrace him regardless if he's stepping over everything that they've stood for the last 40 years.
Does that mean, though, that there's a lot of disaffected Republicans out there looking for a party?
Well, in South Carolina's 1st district, the Democrats think so. They think that they could flip that district, which Trump won by 13 points and Sanford carried by a pretty hefty lead. They believe that there are so many disaffected Republicans in that 1st district, which also encompasses Charleston, that they could win that district. But I would agree with Chris. I think that the end game for Republicans now is winning. And with that is a consequence to the Democrats, like the Supreme Court, immigration, and not having the lead on that. Economics, everything that we stand for is now being led by a Republican Congress and a Republican White House. And we got to figure out how we are going to rage against the machine with real policies, not just saying Trump is a bad president or an idiot or he gives away the forum to Kim. We got to come up with some real policies to be able to talk to those people who are disaffected on the Republican side to get them to come and vote for you again.
I've been saying that for forever. You're not going to win just saying we need to impeach the president. We're not going to win, Dan, doing that. But,
No.
Yeah, that's it.
That's not an,
Go ahead.
that is not an effective strategy. But before we get too far afield, I wanted to talk about women in the Republican Party. Barbara Comstock of Virginia and what's her name, Martha Roby of Alabama, lost their primary bids because more than a year ago, when the Access Hollywood tape came out, they criticized Trump. One said that it was vile. The other one said that this is a person who is not a role model for our children. They saw which way the wind was blowing. They got back on board, and they both lost their primary. So, I have this idea that it's not necessarily that they, and it could be. I'm not going to say that Chris, you're wrong. It's not that the Republicans want to that winning is not their first priority, but I sort of think, listening to moderate, never Trumper Republicans, that part of the party lost their party, and that they don't have a party right now, and that the Trump cult of personality is ascendant. And
well,
so you
the tough thing,
I would absolutely agree with that, Andrea. They are only never Trumpers in just words only, because they vote with him 98% of the time. And so it's one thing to call him out. It's one thing to show that you don't agree with that by not voting for his policy.
But
that's exactly.
But he's doing what they want him to do. Most of these things that he's pushing forward are things that they have championed for years, and so he doesn't necessarily not reflect the face of the Republican Party anymore. And so to those disaffected Republicans who stand back in horror, like most of us on the left, we do need to figure out how to bring them over, and they're providing a lot of openings as he proceeds to trample on long-held economic policies on the right and other steps that he's taken. But it's a difficult quest. Republicans, back in the day when you had a lot of Democrats on the fence, they called themselves conservative Democrats, but they were just waiting for the opening to move over and sign up to become Republicans. And we saw that in waves, especially in states like Texas. You don't see that here in with the Republican Party coming over to the Democratic side, because it's I don't know if it's psychological, but they seem to have a much more difficult time. I talked to a friend of mine who doesn't reflect a Republican in any way, shape, or form in what he stands for, but he told me he finally, for the first time, voted in the Democratic Party this last March, and it was so hard for him when he was asked which party he was in and which primary he was voting in to actually say Democratic.
But he felt good afterwards.
I bet it is hard, because the Democratic Party is in disarray.
Right.
And I said last week or the week before, I was questioning this whole idea of a blue wave. I think that it's turned into a little, what we thought was going to be a tsunami now is just a sort of a gentle ripple. It's not happening. And if we can't get motivated and get some smart people in a room and come up with a platform, something that means something to the American people, we don't have a chance. And frankly, I don't even think that, I think that the Democratic platform is a good platform. And maybe that's the problem. We don't have anything new to offer.
We don't do a good job of selling it, Andy, as part of the problem. That's always been the problem. Obamacare, if you took individual parts of Obamacare, 70 to 80% of the country agreed with many of those parts of the proposal. But you have overwhelming support in the United States, but yet couldn't sell a majority of the American people on the fact that Obamacare was necessary and was good.
Let me tell you why.
That's a communication problem.
Democrats ran away from
No,
Obamacare.
it was President Obama's fault that didn't get sold, because he let it is because he let the Congress sit back and let the Republicans beat him about the head and shoulders all summer instead of forcing the vote when he had 60 votes in the Senate. He should have done it when he had those votes and forced it down their throats and been done with it, just like the Republicans did to us.
That's a messaging problem.
I'm not talking about the selling of the passage of it. I'm talking about once it was passed, Democrats ran away from it because people thought in that district, especially in the South, because it was so unpopular.
Well,
even when Republican governors of states accepted it as Medicaid.
That's
So
because they didn't, and Chris is right. Chris Bell's right. They didn't message it right, and we didn't sell it right. And that goes back to the president.
And,
but
and
that's off topic.
most in the party have been running away from everything, whether it's the environment or guns or Obamacare, health care. We've been great at running away from things for years. And finally, I think if we start owning some of these going forward, people will see we stand for something.
And if you get in getting back to what Andy started with, what got us to this point is if the Democratic Party had a real platform that stood for something that the party could get behind and the people could get behind, then you could pull those disaffected people away from the Republican Party who don't stand for what the president is standing for, and who would stand behind a Bob Corker and a Mark Sanford. Mark Sanford, who said last week, "I pledge allegiance to the flag, not Trump." And then President Trump came out and said, tweeted out and said, this guy, I can't remember exactly, but who was said, don't support this guy who cheated on his wife. For the president of the United States who cheated on how many wives to say that? I mean,
yeah. I mean, you're right. It is a puzzle. Is it because the Republicans are doing the things that the Republican Party wanted all along, and so they're holding their nose, as far as the never Trumpers and all the racists and bigots and narrow-minded wing of the Republican Party is just happy to have Trump in there. They're not holding their nose. They're breathing deeply. And then the Democrats cannot get their act together to save their lives.
But it was. Hold on. It was different. It was different. Donald Trump was cheating with a movie star.
Well.
Okay. Anyway,
define movie.
Well, you should see some of the titles that she appeared in.
Did you see some of them? You have a review?
Every one of them.
I'm sorry, Andy.
Go ahead, Andy.
If you're not in town, that's what happens. It's easier to interrupt you.
Yeah, it is. It is, because I can't give you the stank eye like I do when I'm there. But I'm making it. So just imagine me sitting in that chair. Listen, here's my fear. Here's my current fear. As Republicans win greater and greater power, these things that they are doing with voting rights, the dismantling of voting rights, gerrymandering, packing the courts, they are putting into this recent Supreme Court decision is a good example where the Ohio, I believe, law was upheld that you could purge voters who hadn't voted in
right.
3 elections. You could purge them from the rolls. Once these things are entrenched, and if Ohio can do it, Texas is going to be right behind them, doing the same thing and on down the line. And once these things are in place, it is going to be easier and easier and easier for Republicans to get elected. And the more Republicans that are elected, the harder it is going to be to undo these attempts to limit voting. And this is my fear of the week.
All right, and we're going to end that right there. We're going to move on to the Clinton email scandal bust. We have listened to this Clinton email scandal for how many years now? Finally had the Inspector General's report came out last week. Been waiting on this for a very long time. And lo and behold, the Inspector General got Comey and just hit him right about the head and shoulders. As I think
it might have been a little lower.
I think it was. I was trying to be nice, as I think he should have, but did say at the end of the day that Comey was right not to charge her, which is
but was wrong about everything else.
Was wrong about everything else,
including announcing that.
Right, and we're going to talk about that. And so, but I want to start with Comey's long series of bad decisions, and I don't know that the Republicans can continue to say that Comey didn't have anything to do with the election when you look at the long series of bad decisions. He shouldn't have held his July 2016 news conference about the Clinton investigation, but he did it anyway. He should have informed then Attorney General Loretta Lynch about his recommendations. He shouldn't have told Congress just days before the 2016 election that there were new Clinton emails, and he should have worked on that in September when he found out about it.
Well, I never thought that Hillary Clinton was going to be indicted, and I'll never forget in July of 2016 hearing that he was going to have this announcement and watching that. We were on vacation and thinking, boy, I might have been wrong, because you listened to everything that he was saying, and it sure sounded like we were building up to why she was going to be indicted. And then, of course, got to the end and she wasn't. And it did seem so out of step with other investigations that we've seen. I don't remember any type of similar announcement having been made, and then to find that it's completely out of step with FBI policy, right, and that policy was never followed, and that the investigation was just such an absolute shit show on in a lot of different ways is pretty shocking, because we've talked on here before about the fact that we're worried that a lot of American institutions are in shambles, and how are we going to be able to rebuild those? And so you have Trump on the one hand over there bashing the FBI on a regular basis, and the Justice Department on a regular basis, and then you have this report come out that pretty much backs up what a lot of Democrats have been saying for a long time about that particular investigation.
And still, Comey said in a New York Times op-ed that he still does not think anything in the Inspector General's report said they did anything wrong. Well, so that shows me that shows me, yeah, I know, that shows me that he's still not contrite about what he did. But the thing that got me is they knew for a full year before the 2016 election that they had no evidence. Chris, both of you guys are lawyers, right? And most of the time when you look at your cases, God, man, my client is in a world of hurt. They knew that they didn't have enough evidence to bring charges against Hillary Clinton a full year. This could have been put to rest. Yet we had to endure as voters a full year and a full year of Donald Trump talking about the emails, asking Russia to find the emails, but they knew well ahead of time that they could have put this to rest, and that was a piece that even played. I still believe that him calling that press conference derailed her election, along with her not going to.
It was the letter that derailed her.
Yeah.
Her campaign.
Yeah, and her not going where she
but
needed to do
which they had known, which they had known about much earlier, and
that's the problem. And that's what galled me the most, that they knew about the emails on what was Wiener's laptop, right, a full 8 weeks before they announced it, a week before the election,
and had investigated it and found out that there was no there.
Yeah, and waited until a week before the election to make that announcement. That is the real problem, I think, with what Comey did.
Well, but it does raise all kinds of questions as to why. What was it about the timing? Were they waiting to see who was actually going to be the nominee against Hillary Clinton? And that's why they didn't wrap up the investigation long before. And if it was a Republican that James Comey was friendlier with, was he hoping to bring it out at that time? I don't know. I think there are a lot of unanswered questions.
Let me get Andy involved. Andy, while this investigation was going on about the Clinton email scandal and leaks every day, we now know that the Trump Russia collusion investigation was going on at the exact same time. We knew nothing about that until after the election.
I can understand everything about that whole deal, even Comey's moral dilemma or professional dilemma about, should I say something, should I not say something? And I think that the fact that everybody thought that Hillary was going to win made everybody make the wrong decision, including Barack Obama. But, at the end of the day, Comey is a supercilious, self-important, self-righteous I want to say prick, but I'm going to say dude. And, you know, if he had just followed normal protocol, but I cannot help but believe that he did not like Clinton, and he felt like she was getting away with something, and you know, it was.
But
it was a mess.
you've already
But
chosen
my
not to
thing about the
follow.
report-
You've already chosen not to follow normal protocol. So to create this incredible, extraordinary double standard when another
Yes.
investigation is going on, and not even to mention it,
Yeah, I mean, you
That-
you
yeah,
throw
that-
one
that- that's
candidate
an
under the
excellent
bus.
point.
and
It's an
then just let
excellent
the
point.
other one escape. It's really
So if that
pretty
was
remarkable.
so if that was a deep state conspiracy, it would have been against Hillary.
Yeah, President Trump
Okay,
claimed.
so
Go ahead.
the thing about it is that the report makes crystal clear is that Trump is wrong when he says that you know everything about this shows that the FBI was against his candidacy because every single thing that they did broke in his favor. But getting to the report itself, the very idea that the report found that there was significant bias among the members of the FBI or FBI investigators and staff, but that bias had no bearing on the investigation into the Hillary email issue, and by extension, the Mueller's investigation of Donald Trump and Russia collusion is ridiculous in my mind.
Well,
But you rely on fake
If you
news for all your
decide-
opinions.
If you decide if you do an investigation and you have 25 examples that you could point to as evidence of bias, and then you come to the conclusion that there was incredible bias, it just does not stand to reason that the bias does not infect any investigation that takes place. And I think that is just something that we should understand and not try to make excuses for. I am very sad to think that it is going to taint the Mueller investigation.
how?
And
How does this
you know,
taint the
we're
Mueller
all gonna be
investigation at
worse
all?
for it.
I don't see any way that this taints the Mueller investigation unless we allow the president and the leadership of the GOP to allow it to taint the Mueller investigation. It's two separate investigations.
Well,
We've been powerless to. What are we going to do? We can't let or not let the Congress do anything. The Congress is controlled by Republicans, and they are willing to overlook everything.
We can't
and
get
go
them to do
along with
anything.
The president with whatever he wants.
All right, two final points on this, and we're going to move on. The shocker of the year for me, and what came out of this, is James Comey using personal email while investigating Hillary Clinton for using personal email. I couldn't believe it.
And discussing the investigation on personal.
Yeah, I mean, I was stunned.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so in conclusion, what we have is more congressional investigations going on that detail the very thing that the IG's report detail. So that tells me you don't need these investigations going on because we already know what happened. So, and the Mueller investigation that's going to keep going. So we got this endless conversation about emails and collusion continuing on.
The president came out and said on the south lawn of the White House when he walked out there to do the
Impromptu.
press conference that this report totally vindicates him and shows no collusion. Even his new lapdog, Rudy Giuliani, said that is not true. And which means that, of course, if you follow anything that happens, and if you just look at Michael Cohen, the new lapdog Rudy Giuliani may not be there very much longer. But he said Rudy Giuliani doesn't even agree with that. It does not exonerate the president.
What is sort of extraordinary to me is that I have to be really honest. I always thought the whole email, and I'm making air quotes, scandal was complete bullshit. I could never understand why anyone even really cared. Their policies, you shouldn't be doing it. I know
Right.
that there's security and stuff, but did I really believe that Hillary Clinton was somehow trying to engage in
Subvert
some
the United
nefarious
States,
plot to jeopardize our national security? No. I don't think that was part of this or not. I think it's the world we live in. It's confusing. People have different ways of communicating by email and what have you. And so there just wasn't any criminal intent here whatsoever. So it was all just a lot of bullshit that the Republicans were able to grab hold of and try to make something out of. And it's really incredible that it came to play the role that it did.
Right. All right. That's it. Let's move on to our last topic. It's God's will. Children and parents will be separated by the king.
We are here today to say goodbye to the dearly departed. That's a Richard Pryor joke.
That's right. A new policy. And of course, if you ask the president, this is an old policy that the Democrats put in place, but it is, in fact, a new policy by the Trump administration to charge everyone who illegally crosses the border. And if you come across with your children, you will be immediately separated from your children. Trump claims that Democrats caused this and that only the Democrats can change this. That is just flat not true.
It's not an old policy. It's not what we've been doing. It's horrible. This is not what we are as a country. I think everybody sees that it's horrible. It appears that he's trying to hold these kids hostage by trying to force the Democrats to come to the table and agree to his immigration policy, and they're not going to do that. And he knows they're not going to do that. And to put children in play like this really takes this presidency to a whole new level, and it's not headed up.
It's the most disgusting thing I've seen ever in the time I've watched politics in my lifetime, that a president of the United States would use children as bait to get a policy passed.
Yeah, I agree with that, Chris. So what we have created is a humanitarian and a moral crisis. We created this. But what bothers me is that the Attorney General is using biblical verse to justify it. And let me read that just for a minute.
I was going to do that. Go ahead.
So this is Romans 13. It says, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment upon themselves." So, as a black man, I well know that
The historical reference to that.
Yes, and that was slavery. And
Yeah, but Jeff Sessions has since admitted that he was smoking crack before he said it.
yeah. So, but to me, okay, Chris. Okay, we were texting about this last week, and you said it was a dog whistle to those Southern conservatives. Again, it is absolutely a dog whistle to that base.
3 weeks in a row.
But fortunately, evangelicals, white evangelicals, are actually pushing back on that, saying there's moral ground for doing the right things and not separating these kids from their parents.
There's simply no justification for what this administration is doing.
So
with
you
these
can
kids.
make it your number one goal to make sure that Barack Obama doesn't get elected to a second term, but then quote this Bible verse as saying that everything the government does, you're supposed to hold as God's will.
Andy, the department...
That's an incredible interpretation of the Bible from those good Christian men and women.
Andy, go ahead.
I see three things wrong with this. God did not create any law in the United States, period.
Do you have any proof of that?
Not one. And which is what the verse says, God created the law. God did not create federal, state, or local law in the United States.
How do you know that?
Two,
Jeff Sessions wants your address.
Because I don't believe anything that Jeff Sessions says. Number two, there is no law saying that children must be separated from their parents if they cross the border without the proper papers. there is no law. So whatever law he's referring to is a law that he just made up. Number three, Chris said in his opening for this topic that when people cross the border illegally, they are subject to having their children taken away from them. These are illegal crossers, and they are also people coming across seeking asylum. They are running from something that is so dangerous that they are willing to risk their lives, their children's lives. I think we can argue that the first people for whom who were subject to this being separated from their children did not have any idea that this was going to happen.
Which keeps being lost in all of this, Andy. If I could cut you off for the 10th time today.
Again,
why not?
No,
why
but
not?
I want to make this point because this keeps getting lost in this conversation as to why these people are coming here. And I'll never forget the quote from the president of IBC Bank, who headquartered in Laredo, a strong advocate for immigration reform, Dennis Nixon, saying that as long as you have the Mexican people living in cardboard boxes on mudslide hills, they are going to find a way to come into the United States regardless of anything that you do, whether it's a wall or anything else. And that is the truth of the situation. And so to ignore all of that is absolutely preposterous.
But they want to improve their lives. They don't want to come in here to break the law. They want to improve their lives.
And for him to try to spread that garbage
Yeah.
is so wrong. That's not why they're coming here, and that's been proven over the years.
We're almost out of time for the
Wait
day.
a minute. What? I missed it. What garbage? Who's spreading?
The Trump administration, since the first days of his campaign, trying to act like these people are racist or rapists and criminals, rapists and criminals.
No.
That I'm sure there in some instances, people do bad acts, but in the overwhelming majority of the cases, that's not why the people are here.
All right,
they're seeking better lives.
I
have two questions.
It seems like to me the best immigration policy we had was several decades ago when workers were, migrant workers were allowed to come into the United States, work, and cross back over the border, back and forth freely because they didn't want to be here. They wanted to come here, make money, go home, be with their families, back and forth. What happened was we decided we need to secure our borders, and then people, if they left, they risked not being able to come in again. So at that point, they started trying to bring their families over. And then there was amnesty, the 1980s amnesty under Ronald Reagan, and that's been our immigration policy problem ever since. There's no ability to move freely back and forth across the border so that people can make money in the United States doing jobs that generation after generation, we know for a fact Americans are unwilling to do. Let these people come and improve their lives by working here and then going back.
You're absolutely right.
Solve this problem.
You're absolutely right. And George W. Bush tried to do exactly that, and the Republican Congress wouldn't even take it up. But I got two questions. I got two questions to close this topic out because we're almost out of time for the day. Two questions. How do we as a nation uphold our sanctions against other countries for human rights violations if we're doing this in our country?
No, it creates incredible hypocrisy and we've always we've always set the moral standard for the rest of the world. And now no longer can when people really see this play out and they're watching it before their very eyes. And even Melania Trump today started trying to move away from her husband's own policy.
I think she's moving away more than that.
She's trying to move away from her husband, period. Policy just is sure to follow.
Last question on this topic. Is this the civil rights issue of our time? Is this it?
Well, we were talking earlier about where the Democratic Party needs to go and saying it can't all be anti-Trump. But if this doesn't light a fire under the Democratic Party and lure more people into it to see this kind of cruelty, then nothing ever will.
All right. Well,
You
that's,
know, I think that this is part and parcel of this whole idea of, you know, the buzzword has been political correctness. Political correctness. I remember explaining to a high school student several years ago when she asked me about, you know, what is political correctness? Is it really bad? And I said, listen, people are down on political correctness. But really all it means is being polite, being kind, in that you call people what they want to be called, that you listen to people when they say they don't care for that language, it's offensive. The new one now is identity politics. And, you know, anything you say about the border, anything that you say about Black Lives Matter, anything that you say, the Democrats, when I say you, about me Too. The Republicans tar us with the phrase identity politics, which said they are doing their darndest to make a bad word like political correctness.
Well, this is an issue that we can all rally around, and I would invite people to look on Facebook or other forms of social media, find out who's organizing demonstrations. I know there are pickets planned for here in Houston. Participate in those demonstrations. Pick up your phone, call your members of Congress, call your senators, and let them know how horrific
and certainly
you find this policy
certainly a
to
topic
be.
we're going to stay on right here on What's Left America. But that's all the time we have today, and we're going to close out this show with Out of Left Field like we do every week. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Go ahead.
All right, go ahead,
I'll
Andy.
go first because we were talking about Jeff Sessions and his use of Bible verses to support his cruelty on the border. And my feeling about that is that when the evil that you want to do is supported neither by reason, logic, or the Constitution, then go ahead and pull a couple of Bible verses out of context for support. And in backing up my thesis, I would like for our listeners to hear just a very short clip of the Reverend Dr. William Barber, who is the architect of Moral Mondays activism. And if you go online and look up Moral Mondays, you'll see what I'm talking about there, and who is reviving Martin Luther King's Poor People's Campaign. And so we'll play that.
I would cite you to the Apostle Paul and his clear and wise command in Romans 13 to obey the laws of the government, because God has ordained the government for his purposes. Orderly and lawful processes are good in themselves. Consistent, fair application of law is in itself a good and moral thing, and that protects the weak. It protects the lawful.
And then now listen to a short snippet of Jeff Beauregard Sessions using the Bible to break up families on the border.
Paul actually was arrested by the government because Christians challenged the government. That's one of the reasons Paul ends up getting killed. So that's the first thing. Second of all, the Bible is clear from the Old Testament to the New Testament that one of God's primary concerns is that we care for the stranger, that we do not rob children of their rights and mothers of their children, that we welcome the stranger and make sure that the stranger, the immigrant, the undocumented person is treated like a brother or sister. You cannot find anywhere where Jesus or the prophets would say anything like what Sessions said. Now, he is operating from a playbook. That's the same kind of heresy that was used to support the genocide of Native Americans. It's the same kind of biblical heresy that was used to support slavery and used to support Jim Crow.
And that's my out of left field.
So my out of left field is it's time for Bill Clinton to exit stage left. Not a lot of millennials know him or the name Monica Lewinsky, but many of them know the Me Too movement and how it has empowered women to speak out against men who abuse their power against women. Clinton, I think, has shown a blatant indifference to that movement and to directly apologizing to Monica Lewinsky. So perhaps Al Gore knew something when he didn't get Clinton involved in his campaign. No doubt, Bill Clinton has been a strong advocate for democratic causes, including supporting Barack Obama. But he's also shown bad judgment, for instance, during his wife's campaign by meeting with Loretta Lynch on a plane. His most recent interview with NBC didn't go over well at all because he still doesn't get it about Monica Lewinsky. So perhaps he's worn out his welcome, and Dems need to decide if he is a liability or an asset. I have an idea. Barack Obama, it's time for you to step up.
All right, I'll go next.
You're here.
I'll go next. My out of left field this week's about the right to a jury trial. I try a lot of cases, and last week I was reminded by a client of why the right to a jury trial is so important. In the United States, the Supreme Court has ruled that the defendant in a criminal trial gets to make two decisions: whether or not to pick a jury and whether or not to testify. And his lawyer gets to make every other decision in the trial, in the trial of the case. And last week, I had a client who I thought should plead guilty, and he said, "I didn't do anything wrong, and I won't plead guilty because I can't. My conscience won't allow me." And I said, "I think you're making a mistake because I don't think factually you can win." And I said, "But I will support you, and I will try your case." And we went to trial. And on both of the indictments that we tried at the same time, this man was found not guilty. And because of his integrity and his fortitude and his belief in the system, he's a free man today. And he reminded me of why we have a justice system. And I needed that lesson, and we all do. We have the greatest system of justice in the world, and that man's integrity and his belief in our system buoyed me back to where I needed to be. We have a great system.
And he was also fortunate to have an outstanding lawyer.
That is what I was going to say. I second that.
This has been a rather heavy show. Andy went off on Bill Clinton last week. James did today. I was going to stand up for my friend in my out of left field today, but I'll save that for another time. I think we need a little levity. We were talking about immigration earlier. I hadn't gotten to tell any of my old political war stories today, and one that of my favorites is back when I was running for governor in 2006. Immigration was a hot issue back then, just like it is today. And I had a plan that I would throw out whenever I was asked about immigration. I wanted more border security. I certainly wanted a pathway to citizenship. And I wanted to take greater advantage of technology, using drones to perhaps send messages back to the ground so a greater swath of the border could be guarded. And whenever the issue would come up, that would be my response. And one day we were down in the valley here in Texas, which is overwhelmingly Hispanic. And my travel aide, Adam Briscoe, called me over before we went into this little cafe where I was speaking. He said, "I hope this would take care of itself, but it hasn't. It's happened about 6 times, and I've just got to tell you something." He says, drones are little robotic planes that can fly over and send messages back to the ground. Gnomes are little elf-like creatures that usually are seen as garden figurines. You keep saying gnomes, which led to a great deal of discussion around the campaign because nobody had pushed back on my plan. Nobody had asked if the gnomes were going to be armed or if they were just going to be jumping out of the weeds saying, "No, get back, you're not welcome here." And so we cleaned it up and we said drones from then on. But gnomes will always be a very special part of my life as a result of that campaign experience.
That's all the time we have this week for What's Left America. We'll see you next week. Be sure to like us on Facebook and be sure to rate us on iTunes. We'll see you next week. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there.